Book I, Chapter 6. What Befell Me at the White Hart. When a man has experienced some great and totally unexpected reverse of fortune, has been swept from one plane of existence to another, that he should fail at once to recognize the full magnitude of that change is but natural, for his faculties must of necessity be numbed more or less by its very suddenness. Yesterday I had been reduced from affluence to poverty with an unexpectedness that had dazed me for the time being, and, from the poverty of an hour ago, I now found myself reduced to an utter destitution, without the wherewithal to pay for the meanest night's lodging. And, contrasting the careless ease of a few days since with my present lamentable situation, I fell into a gloomy meditation, and the longer I thought it over, the more dejected I became. To be sure, I might apply to Sir Richard for assistance, but my pride revolted at even the thought, more especially at such an early stage. Moreover, I had determined beforehand to walk my appointed road unaided from the first. From these depressing thoughts I was presently aroused by a loud, rough voice at no great distance, to which, though I had been dimly conscious of it for some time, I had before paid no attention. Now, however, I raised my eyes from the spot upon the floor where they had rested hitherto, and fixed them upon the speaker. He was a square-shouldered, bullet-headed fellow, evidently held in much respect by his companions, for he occupied the head of the table, and I noticed that whenever he spoke, the others held their peace, and hung upon the words with an appearance of much respect. "Yes, sirs," says I, he began louder than before, and with a flourish of his long-stemmed pipe. "Yes, sirs, Tom Cragg's my name, and Craggy my natur. I be hard, sirs, devilish hard, and uncommon rocky. Here's a face as likes good knocks, I says. Why, when I fought Crib Burke o' Bristol, he broke his and again my jaw. So he did, and I scarce knowed he had hit me, till I see him open with the pain of it. Come, sirs, says I, who'll give me a black eye? A fiver's all I ask. Well, up comes a young buck, ready and willing. Tom, says he, I'll take 2 flaps at that flagger head o' yourn for 7 guineas. Come, what d'ye say? I says, done, says I. So my fine gentleman lays by his hat and cane, strips off his right-hand glove, and heaving back lets fly at me. Bang comes his fist against my jaw, and there's my gentleman a-dabbing at his broken knuckles with his handkercher. Come, my lord, says I, fair is fair, take your other whack. Damnation, says he, take your money and go to the devil, says he. I thought you was flesh and blood, and not cast iron. Craggy, my lord, says I, gathering up the rhino. Cragg is my name, and Craggy by nature, my lord, says I. Hereupon ensued a roar of laughter, with much slapping of thighs and stamping of feet, while the bullet-headed man solemnly emptied his tankard, which was the signal for 2 or 3 of those nearest to vie for its possession, during which Tom Cragg sucked dreamily at his pipe and stared placidly up at the ceiling. "Now, Tom," says a tall, bony individual, chiefly remarkable in possessing but one eye, and that so extremely pale and watery as to give one the idea that it was very much overworked. "Now, Tom," said he, setting down the refilled tankard at the great man's elbow with a triumphant flourish, "tell us how you shook hands with the Prince Regent." "Ah, tell us," chimed the rest. "Well," said the bullet-headed man, stooping to blow the froth from his ale, "it was arter I beat Jack Nolan o' Brummagem. The Prince he come a-running to me, he did, as I set in my corner a-workin' at a loose tusk. 'Tom,' he says, 'Tom, you be a wonder. I done Jack Nolan a proper, I think, your Highness,' says I. 'Tom,' says he, with tears in his eyes, 'you 'ave. And if I had my way,' says he, 'I'd make you Prime Minister to-morrer,' he says, and slapped me on the back, he did, with his merry own hand, and likewise gave me this here pin. saying which, he pointed to a flaming diamond horseshoe which he wore stuck through his neckerchief. The stones were extremely large and handsome, looking very much out of place on the fellow's rough person, and seemed in some part to bear out his story; though indeed, as regarded his association with the Prince Regent, whose tastes were at all times peculiar, to say the least, and whose love for "the fancy" was notorious, I thought it, on the whole, very probable; for despite Craggy's words, foolishly blatant though they sounded, there was about him in his low, retreating brow, his small, deep-set eyes, his great square jowl and heavy chin, a certain air there was no mistaking. I also noticed that the upper half of one ear was unduly thick and swollen, which is a mark, I believe, of the professional pugilist alone. "Tom!" cried the one-eyed man, "what's all this we heerd o' Ted Jarraway o' Swansea bein' knocked out in 5 rounds by this here Lord Vibbot up in London?" "Vibbot!" repeated Cragg, frowning into his tankard. "I haven't heard of no Vibbot, neither Lord, Earl, nor Duke." "Come, Tom," coaxed the other, "everybody's heerd o' Buck Vibbot, 'im they calls the fightin' baronite." "If," said Cragg, rolling his bullet head, "if you was to ask me who put Ted Jarraway to sleep, I should answer you Sir Maurice Vibart, commonly called Buck Vibart, and it took 10 rounds to do it, not 5. As may be expected, at this mention of my cousin's name, I pricked up my ears. "And what's all this 'bout 'im putting out Tom Cragg in 3?" At this there was a sudden silence, and all eyes were turned towards the speaker, a small red-headed fellow with a truculent eye. "Come," said he, blowing out a cloud of tobacco smoke, "in 3 rounds. What d'ye say to that now, come?" Cragg had started up in his chair, and now sat scowling at his inquisitor open-mouthed, and in the hush I could hear the ticking of the clock in the corner, and the crackle of the logs upon the hearth. Then, all at once, Cragg's pipe shivered to fragments on the floor, and he leapt to his feet. In one stride, as it seemed, he reached the speaker, who occupied the corner opposite mine, but, even as he raised his fist, he checked himself before the pocket pistol which the other held levelled across the table. "Come, come, none o' that," said the red-headed man, his eye more truculent than ever. "I ain't a fightin' cove myself, and I don't want no trouble. All I asks is, what about Buck Vibart putting out Tom Cragg in 3 rounds? That's a civil question, ain't it? What do you say now, come?" "I says," cried Tom Cragg, flourishing a great fist in the air, "I says as he done it on a foul." And he smote the table a blow that set the glasses ringing. "Done it on a foul?" cried 3 or 4 voices. "On a foul," repeated Cragg. "Think again," said the red-headed man. "'Twere said as it was a werry clean knock-out." "And I says it were done on a foul," reiterated Cragg, with another blow of his fist. "And what's more, if Buck Vibart stood afore me, in this 'ere very room, I'd prove my words." "Humph!" said the red-headed man. "They do say as he's wonderful quick with his moulies, and can hit like a sledge-hammer." "Quick with his 'ands he may be, and able to give a goodish thump, but as for beatin' me, it's all me eye and Betty Martin, and you can lay to that, my lads. I would put him to sleep any time and anywhere, and I'd like to see the cove as says contrary." And here the pugilist scowled round upon his hearers, more especially the red-headed man, so blackly that 1 or 2 of them shuffled uneasily, and the latter individual appeared to become interested in the lock of his pistol. "I'd like," repeated Cragg, "I'd like to see the cove as says contrary." "No one ain't a-goin' to, Tom," says the one-eyed man, soothingly, "not a soul, Lord bless you." "I only wish they would," growled Cragg. "Ain't there nobody to obleege the gentleman?" inquired the red-headed man. "I'd fight any man as ever was born. Wish I may die," snorted Cragg. "You always was so fiery, Tom," purred the one-eyed man, blinking his pale orb. "I were," cried the prize fighter, working himself into another rage.
"Ah, and I'm proud of it. I'd fight any man as ever wore breeches. Why, burn me, I'd give any man 10 shillings as could stand up to me for 10 minutes."
10 shillings? said I to myself. 10 shillings, when one comes to think of it, is a very handsome sum, more especially when one is penniless and destitute.
"Wish I may die!"
roared Cragg, smiting his fist down on the table again.
"A guinea! A golden guinea to the man as could stand on his pins and fight for me for 5 minutes. And as for Buck Vibart, curse him, I say as he won on a foul."
"A guinea," said I to myself, "is a fortune." And setting down my empty tankard, I crossed the room and touched Cragg upon the shoulder. "I will fight you," said I, "for a guinea." Now, as the fellow's eyes met mine, he rose up out of his chair, and his mouth opened slowly, but he spoke no word, backing from me until he was stayed by the table, where he stood staring at me. And once again there fell a silence, in which I heard the tick of the clock in the corner, and the crackle of the logs upon the hearth.
"You,"
said he, recovering himself with an effort, "you," and as he spoke I saw his left eyelid twitch suddenly. "Exactly," I answered. "I think I can stand up to even you for 5 minutes." Now as I spoke he winked at me again. That it was meant for me was certain, seeing that his back was towards the others, though what he intended to convey I could form no idea, so I assumed as confident an air as possible, and waited. Hereupon the one-eyed man broke into a sudden raucous laugh, in which the others joined.
"'Ark to him, lads!"
he cried, pointing to me with the stem of his pipe.
"He be a fine un to stand up to Tom Cragg, I don't think." "Tell him to go and larn himself to grow whiskers first,"
cried a second.
To be sure, he aren't got so much as our old cat,"
grinned a third.
"Stay!"
cried the one-eyed man, peering up at me beneath his hand.
"Is these whiskers a peeping at me over his cravat, or do my eyes deceive me?"
Which pleasantry called forth another roar of laughter at my expense. Now, very foolishly perhaps, this nonsense greatly exasperated me, for I was, at the time, painfully conscious of my bare lips and chin. It was, therefore, with an effort that I mastered my quickly rising temper, and once more addressed myself to Cragg. "I am willing," said I, "to accept your conditions and fight you, for a guinea, or any other man here for that matter, except the humorous gentleman with the watery eye, who could name his own price." The fellow in question stared at me, glanced slowly round, and, sitting down, buried his face in his tankard. "Come, Tom Cragg," said I, "a while ago you seemed very anxious for a man to fight. Well, I'm your man." And with the words I stripped off my coat and laid it across a chair back. This apparent willingness on my part was but a cloak for my real feelings, for I will not here disguise the fact that the prospect before me was anything but agreeable. Indeed, my heart was thumping in a most unpleasant manner, and my tongue and lips had become strangely parched and dry, as I fronted Cragg. Truly, he looked dangerous enough, with his beetling brow, his great depth of chest, and massive shoulders, and the possibility of a black eye or so, and a general pounding from the fellow's knotted fists, was daunting in the extreme. Still, the chance of earning a guinea, even under such conditions, was not to be lightly thrown away. Therefore I folded my arms, and waited with as much resolution as I could.
"Sir,"
said Cragg, speaking in a very altered tone,
"sir, you seem uncommon eager for it."
"I shall be glad to get it over," said I.
"If,"
he went on slowly,
"if I said anything against you know who, I'm sorry for it, me 'aving the greatest respect for you know who. You understand me, I think?"
And herewith he winked 3 separate and distinct times. "No, I don't understand you in the least," said I, "nor do I think it at all necessary. All that I care about is the guinea in question."
"Come, Tom,"
cried one of the company.
"Knock his head off to begin with." "Ay, set about it, Tom. Cut your gab and finish him."
And here came the clatter of chairs as the company rose.
"Can't be done," said Cragg, shaking his head. "Leastways not here."
"I'm not particular," said I. "If you prefer, we might manage it very well in the stable with a couple of lanterns."
"The barn would be the very place,"
suggested the landlord, bustling eagerly forward and wiping his hands on his apron.
"The very place. Plenty of room and nice and soft to fall on. If you would only put off your fightin' till to-morrow, we might cry it through the villages. It would be a big draw. Ecod, we might make a purse of £20, if only you would. Think it over, think it over."
"To-morrow I hope to be a good distance from here," said I. "Come, the sooner it is over the better. Show us your barn." So the landlord called for lanterns and led the way to a large outbuilding at the back of the inn, into which we all trooped. "It seems to be a good place and very suitable," said I.
"You may well say that," returned the landlord. "It's many a fine bout has been brought off in here. The time Jem Belcher beat the young ruffian, the Prince o' Wales sat in a cheer over in that theer corner, and that was a day, if you please."
"If Tom Cragg is ready," said I, turning up the wristbands of my shirt, "why, so am I." Here it was found, to every one's surprise, and mine in particular, that Tom Cragg was not in the barn. Surprise gave place to noisy astonishment when, after much running to and fro, it was further learned that he had vanished altogether. The inn itself, the stables, and even the haylofts were ransacked without avail. Tom Cragg was gone as completely as though he had melted into thin air, and with him all my hopes of winning the guinea and a comfortable bed. It was with all my old dejection upon me, therefore, that I returned to the tap room, and, refusing the officious aid of the one-eyed man, put on my coat, readjusted my knapsack, and crossed to the door. On the threshold I paused, and looked back. "If," said I, glancing round the ring of faces, "if there is any man here who is at all willing to fight for a guinea, 10 shillings, or even 5, I should be very glad of the chance to earn it." But seeing how each wilfully avoided my eye, held his peace, I sighed, and, turning my back upon them, set off along the darkening road. Book I, Chapter VII. Of the further puzzling behavior of Tom Cragg the pugilist. Evening had fallen, and I walked along in no very happy frame of mind, the more so, as the rising wind and flying rack of clouds above, through which a watery moon had peeped at fitful intervals, seemed to presage a wild night. It needed but this to make my misery the more complete, for, as far as I could tell, if I slept at all, and I was already very weary, it must, of necessity, be beneath some hedge or tree. As I approached the brow of the hill, I suddenly remembered that I must once more pass the gibbet, and began to strain my eyes for it. Presently I spied it, sure enough, its grim, gaunt outline looming through the murk, and instinctively I quickened my stride so as to pass it as soon as might be. I was almost abreast of it when a figure rose from beneath it, and slouched into the road to meet me. I stopped there and then, and, grasping my heavy staff, waited its approach.
"Be that you, sir?"
said a voice, and I recognized the voice of Tom Cragg. "What are you doing, and there of all places?"
"Oh, I ain't afeard of 'im,"
answered Cragg, jerking his thumb towards the gibbet.
"I ain't afeard of none as ever drawed breath, dead or livin', except it be 'is 'Ighness the Prince Regent."
"And what do you want with me?"
"I 'opes as there's no offence, my lord,"
said he, knuckling his forehead, and speaking in a tone that was a strange mixture of would-be comradeship and cringing servility.
"Craggy's my name, and craggy's my natur', but I know when I'm beat. I knowed ye as soon as I laid my peepers on ye, and if I said it were a foul, why, When a man's in his cups, d'ye see, he's apt to shoot rayther wide o' the gospel, d'ye see, and there was no offence, me lord, strike me blind. I know you, and you know me. Tom Cragg by name, and Craggy by—"
"But I don't know you," said I, "and, for that matter, neither do you know me."
"Why, he ain't got no whiskers, my lord, leastways, not with you now, but—"
"And what the devil has that got to do with it?" said I angrily.
"Disguises, p'raps," said the fellow with a sly leer, "arter that theer kidnappin', and me 'avin' laid out Sir Jarsper Trent in Wick Street, accordin' to your orders, my lord, the Prince gave me words to clear out, cut and run for it till it blowed over, and I thought p'raps, knowin' as you and 'im had 'ad words, I thought as you had got stick too."
"And I think that you are manifestly drunk," said I. "If you still wish to fight, for any sum, no matter how small, put up your hands. If not, get out of my road." The craggy one stepped aside, somewhat hastily, which done, he removed his hat, and stood staring and scratching his bullet head as one in sore perplexity.
"I seen a many rum goes in my time," said he, "but I never see so rummy a go as this here. Strike me dead."
So I left him, and strode on down the hill. As I went, the moon shot out a feeble ray through some rift in the rolling clouds, and, looking back, I saw him standing where I had left him beneath the gibbet, still scratching his bullet head and staring after me down the hill. Now the whole attitude and behavior of the fellow was puzzling to no small degree. My mind was too full of my own concerns to give much thought to him. Indeed, scarce was he out of my sight but I forgot him altogether. For what with my weariness, the long dark road before and behind me, and my empty pockets, I became a prey to great dejection. So much so that I presently sank wearily beside the way, and, resting my chin in my hands, sat there, miserably enough, watching the night deepen about me. "And yet," said I to myself, "if, as Epictetus says, to despise a thing is to possess it, then am I rich, for I have always despised money; and if, weary as I am, I can manage to condemn the luxury of a feather bed, then to-night, lying in this grassy ditch beneath the stars, I shall slumber as sweetly as ever I did between the snowy sheets." Saying which, I rose and began to look about for some likely nook in the hedge where I might pass the night. I was thus engaged when I heard the creak of wheels and the pleasant rhythmic jingle of harness on the dark hill above, and in a little while a great wagon or wain, piled high with hay, hove into view, the driver of which rolled loosely in his seat with every jolt of the wheels, so that it was a wonder he did not roll off altogether. As he came level with me I hailed him loudly, whereupon he started erect and brought his horses to a stand.
"Halloa!"
he bellowed, in the loud, strident tone of one rudely wakened.
"What d'ye want with I?"
"A lift," I answered. "Will you give a tired fellow a lift on his way?"
"What, I don't know. Be you a talkin' chap?"
"I don't think so," said I.
"Because, if you be a talkin' chap, I bean't a-goin' to give 'ee a lift nohow. Not if I knows it. Give a chap a lift t'other day, I did. Took 'im up t'other side of Sevenoaks, and 'e talked me up hill and down hill, 'e did. Dang me if I could get a wink o' sleep all the way to Tonbridge. So, if you're a talkin' chap, you don't get no lift with I."
"I am generally a very silent chap," said I. "Besides, I am too tired and sleepy to talk, even if I wished."
"Sleepy?"
yawned the man.
"Then up you get, my chap. I'm sleepy too. I allus am. Lord love you, there's nought like sleep. Up with you, my chap."
Forthwith up I clambered, and, laying myself down among the fragrant hay, stretched out my tired limbs and sighed. Never shall I forget the delicious sense of restfulness that stole over me as I lay there upon my back, listening to the creak of the wheels, the deliberate hoof strokes of the horses, muffled in the thick dust of the road, and the gentle snore of the driver who had promptly fallen asleep again. On he went as if borne on air, so soft was my bed, now beneath the far-flung branches of trees, sometimes so low that I could have touched them with my hand, now beneath a sky heavy with sombre masses of flying cloud, or bright with the soft radiance of the moon. On I went, careless alike of destination, of time, and of future, content to lie there upon the hay and rest. And so, lulled by the gentle movement, by the sound of wheels and harness, and the whisper of the soft wind about me, I presently fell into a most blessed sleep. Section 3